Hello. Today I am going to share my great-grandmother's secret recipe for banana cake. So I hope you enjoy this video. So what we need, of course, is flour and sugar and butter and eggs and all the general things that go into making a cake, as well as mashed bananas. So let's go over what we need. I have here 3/4 of a cup of butter, and that's a stick and a half. And then we have 2 1/4 cups of sugar. And now, before you panic and say, "Oh my God, that's diabetes in a bowl," we need to talk a little bit about the science of baking. Because there's a reason for every ingredient and why we have to measure so carefully when we're baking. So let me use the analogy of a graham cracker crust. A lot of folks, when they want to make that graham cracker crust for their lovely cheesecake, and the recipe calls for a couple of tablespoons of sugar, often leave it out. They think, oh, graham crackers are already sweet, we don't need more sugar. But that's not the purpose of the sugar in that recipe or even this one. Yes, it does add sweetness, but you need to think of the properties of sugar. You know, it's in a granulated form now, and it dissolves slightly in any liquid that you might have. But once it's heated, it liquefies completely, and then when it cools, it hardens. Think about a hard candy. That's mostly sugar that's been boiled, and then it hardens. So it acts like a glue. So when you don't add those 2 tablespoons of sugar to your graham cracker crust, what happens is that when the cheesecake is done and you go to cut it and serve it, the crust falls apart like sand. But when you keep the sugar in there, it acts like glue and it keeps your crust together. So yes, the sugar is going to add some sweetness, even though we've already got bananas in there, but it's also going to help in the process of solidifying the cake along with the fat and the eggs as binders. So we left off at 2 1/4 cups of sugar. Next, we've got 3 cups of flour. We've got 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. That's for browning. We want our cake nice and brown. And then for the lift, we've got 1 1/8 teaspoons of baking powder. And then we have anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and that all depends on whether or not you use salted or unsalted butter. If you're using salted butter, then you would only want 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and if you're using unsalted butter, then you'd go for 3/4. So sometimes you have to take whatever the grocery store has got, so you would adjust your salt accordingly. Then we've got 3 eggs. We've got 1 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla. We've got 1/3 of a cup of sour milk. Now here's how you make sour milk. You take some milk and you add about a tablespoon of white vinegar. Now what I like to do first is to add my 1 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla, because vanilla is going to have some alcohol in it. So we'll add that first and stir it around. And then we'll gradually add this tablespoon of vinegar a little at a time, because we don't want the milk to get too thick. What happens is that it curdles the milk slightly, and you want it to be thick enough to coat a knife. So that's what we want. And then, of course, we have 1 1/2 cups of mashed bananas. I have them here. Now, it's important when it comes to your bananas to get the right kind. You don't want a banana that's still green. It's not going to mash. It's going to be too hard. It's not going to have a lot of flavor. You also don't want a banana that's gone black, because that can be bitter, and also the structure of the banana on the inside has pretty much turned to gelatin. What you want are bananas like these with lots of sugar spots. That means there's going to be plenty of flavor in that banana. It's going to be soft enough to mash. And then when I mash mine, I like to use a rectangular baking dish like this instead of a bowl, because it allows you to spread the bananas out and mash them evenly. When they're in a bowl, the ones at the bottom tend to get too mushy, and then the ones at the top are too chunky. But if you've got them in a nice wide flat surface like that, then it's much easier to mash them. So now we will start the mixing process. And with a lot of baking, of course, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cream, butter, and sugar. So in our mixing bowl, we're going to place the butter and start the creaming process. So let's get that in there. And you need room temperature butter always. So I like to cut it into small pieces. That helps it to warm up better. So we'll set this in, lock it down, and I always like to start out on low. The last thing you want is bits of things flying all over the house. Stop it here and see some of the butter is kind of stuck in there, so we'll take a small spatula and get that out. We want to make sure that the butter is nice and soft and has a light color to it. Good, it's getting nice and soft. Okay, let's clean the beaters out again, and then we're going to start gradually adding the sugar. We add it a little at a time, mostly because we don't want it flying all over the place, but also to give it a chance to really incorporate well. The creaming of the butter and the sugar is very important because once you coat the butter crystals in all of this fat, it's going to get really, really light and fluffy, and that's what you want for your cake. Cakes are fluffy. Pies are juicy, but cakes are fluffy. Okay. Now we're going to start slowly adding the sugar. Let's check it now. We've got some that's up on the sides. We want to make sure we scrape it down, that everything's getting nicely incorporated. See how fluffy it's getting? That's what we want. Okay. Back down in, lock it up. Always start slowly and then speed up. scrape down, and then we're going to start adding our eggs. And we want to add our eggs one at a time, let them incorporate, and then we're going to beat everything nicely. You can see that this is well incorporated now. The sugar crystals are well coated with the butter. Okay. Get that back down in. Lock into position. Now we start out slowly. Add an egg. Let that incorporate. Now back down to slow. Add another egg. Let that incorporate. Another egg. And now really let it go. Here we want it to get very nice and fluffy. You want to check it, give a quick scrape down, and then give it a, I just want to make sure that there's no chunks of butter down at the bottom. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Now we're going to switch out the beater for the paddle, because the next stage of the cake is very important in terms of not overbeating the flour. You produce too much gluten and then your cake is tough. So we're going to switch over to the paddle, and we're going to be using much lower speeds as we incorporate all of the remaining ingredients. Scrape everything down. And let's take a look at what this looks like before we start adding anything else. But you see how wonderful and light and fluffy that is. Okay, now here we have our flour. And one of the things that's important to do is to get all of your baking powder, baking soda, etc. Worked in first so that you don't have pockets of it. So there's our bowl of flour, and I'm going to take the salt and the baking soda and the baking powder, put them in a little bowl, kind of mix them around a little bit. Then we put that into the flour and mix that around so that everything is in there and we don't have to worry about pockets of those ingredients. Because there's nothing worse than biting into a cake and getting a lump of baking powder or something. All right. So with the paddle attachment in and a very low speed, we are going to alternately add the flour, the milk, and the bananas. So I like to use a ladle, a 1 cup ladle. Get some flour going in there. And I grab a gob of banana and put that in there, alternating. Once it's a little bit wet again, I add a little more flour. And then I add some of the milk. And again, some more flour. Banana. flour. Milk. A little more flour. Last of the banana. And finally, the last of the flour. There you go. Let that incorporate for just a moment, and then I'll stop it and scrape down the sides. Give everything a good scrape down. Okay, one last little round of stirring. But never at any time am I going to beat this mixture because we want it to be a tender cake and not develop a lot of gluten in the flour. There, I think that's pretty good. Stop it. There we go. We'll scrape everything down. I love these little spatulas that get into all the small nooks and crannies. It's perfect for these beaters and the paddle. There we go. Take this off. Well, the bowl anchors to the stand, so I'll loosen it. Oh, we dropped a bit. And I'm just going to take and run this big spatula in there one more time. I'm really going to dig down in just to make sure that there's no pockets of unincorporated flour. Let's move this out of the way, make sure you can see. Perfect. Now we're going to get ready and put them in the pans. Let's talk a moment about the pans. Okay. I have here two 8-inch rounds, and depending on how much you like to spend, you can butter the bottom of the pan and then put your parchment in, or like me, I sprayed it with some Pam or other kind of cooking spray, and then put the parchment in, and then buttered the top of the parchment, because why butter the bottom of the pan that doesn't touch the cake? Then I buttered the sides and lightly dusted them with flour so that I can make sure that we get full release when it's time to turn the cake out. But I don't need to put any flour on the parchment paper because it's non-stick. So I have two 8-inch rounds here, and I like to use dark tin pans because it helps with browning. So now we're going to take our mixture and evenly divide it between these two cake pans. And I'm going to go back to that ladle that I had so that I can make sure that I'm distributing everything evenly. Because I know it holds about a cup, so put a cup in one. Let's tilt this up so you can see what I'm doing here. Then I put a cup in another one, approximately, and back and forth like this so that I can make sure that each cake pan has got an even amount. Meanwhile, my oven has been heating to 350 degrees. Okay. Here we go. The last little bit. Don't want to lose any of that delicious batter. Now we want to kind of shake it down, make sure there's no air bubbles, and everything's nice and even. Okay, the cake pans are ready to go into the oven. They both are evenly distributed. And now, as I said, I like to use the dark metal pans to promote browning, but I don't want my cakes to burn. I also don't want them to create a huge dome. There's going to be some doming, but sometimes you get a lot of doming and you have to cut the top off and it wastes a lot of cake. So I have these really great gadgets that I bought online, and you wet them and you wrap it around your cake and pin it on, and it keeps the sides from getting too hot. I also put my cake pans on a cookie sheet and put them in the oven. And again, we want browning, but we don't want the bottoms to burn or the sides to get too hot to create too much doming. So I always put them on a cookie sheet when I place them in the oven. Okay, cakes are in a 350 degree oven. And we'll set the cooking time for about 35 minutes. Give or take. I mean, we'll test the cakes at that point and see how well they're doing. Sometimes it can take up to 40 minutes. So while the cake is baking, let's focus on the frosting. Now, as much as I love my great-grandmother's recipe for banana cake, frosting it has always been a problem. Growing up as a kid, my mom would always frost it with whipped cream, which was a little bit too light. I mean, this is a cake with some body to it. And I imagine in my great-grandmother's day, maybe they made a sort of a buttercream. I tried cream cheese frosting a couple of times, but that was just too sweet and too rich. So I have landed upon a happy medium in which I take cream cheese and whipped cream and mix them together, and it's nice and creamy, a little bit light, not too sweet, not too rich. It's just perfect for this cake. So right now in the mixer with the paddle attachment, I have 2 packages of room temperature cream cheese that I'm going to now soften up a bit more. So we'll start on low so it's not all over the place. And then we'll speed it up a little bit. Get that with cream cheese nice and soft. Let's stop and scrape down. Now I'm using the paddle attachment at this point because I just want it to be soft. I don't want to get a lot of air in it yet. I will be switching to the beaters when I incorporate the whipped cream. But right now we're just after getting it soft. I mean, it's room temperature and it's fairly soft, but I want it to get it even more spreadably soft. take a look at the consistency here. That's good. That's nice and soft. Yes, that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to scrape this down, and I'm going to remove the paddle attachment and put on the whisk. Okay, now we move on to the whipped cream. Now, whereas you want your cream cheese room temperature, cream is best whipped when it's really, really cold. So I've just now taken it out of the refrigerator. I'm using a pint, which is 2 cups, and I've kept the bowl in the freezer to make it really cold, as well as the beater for the mixer. And I'm going to be using the whisk attachment on a hand mixer for this part. So we're going to pre-whip the cream to a thick stage, and then we'll add it to the cream cheese and whip the 2 of them together. There we go. Now, I do it in the sink because it's messy. So, I hope it doesn't spatter on the camera lens. Ready? Here we go. Now, as it starts to thicken, I'm going to sprinkle in, it's getting away from me, about a half a cup of confectioner's sugar. You always use confectioner's sugar with whipping cream, not granulated sugar. It helps to stabilize the whipped cream. Okay, I'm going to stop here because it's nice and thick, but I don't want to whip it all the way because we're going to do more whipping and we don't want our whipped cream turning to butter. Okay, so I have the whisk attachment on the stand mixer, and now I'm going to add some vanilla, a teaspoon of vanilla, and a couple of tablespoons of granulated sugar to our cream cheese here. Start getting that nice and mixed up. There we go. And now I'm going to add the whipped cream. Stop it a moment. Get the rest of the whipped cream in. You can see it's already getting really nice and thick. Put the last of that in. We don't want to lose a single drop of this lovely whipped cream. Although I might save a smidge for the kitty cats. Get it back down, lock. And now we're going to whip. Okay, I want to check for consistency. I also want to scrape up the bottom a little bit because there could be some cream cheese stuck down there, and we want to make sure that everything gets incorporated. just a few more seconds, just a final mix in, because there were some bits kind of stuck down there. Lock and load. Okay. Look at the consistency. Isn't it lovely? I mean, it's like a buttercream, but it's lighter. We didn't use all that much there. I mean, think about how much confectioner's sugar you use in a buttercream. And it hasn't got all that butter in it. And it's just the cream cheese and the whipped cream. Mmm. Really delicious. I mean, it's sweet, and it's tangy, and it's light, and it's fluffy. It's going to be perfect for the cake. Now, I've taken them out of the oven, and they're cooling nicely on the racks. You cool them first in the pan, and then you turn them out on the rack. So I'll be doing that in a minute, and as soon as they're cool, we will slice each of these in half so that we will have 4 layers. And once they're cooled completely, we will frost. And the beauty of this frosting, the reason I like it, is that I'm not good with a piping bag. So I'm able to use this to make lovely swoops and swirls on the cake. And it just comes out looking like a fluffy, fluffy cloud. So we'll start putting all of this together and see the final result. Now I want to talk a minute about doming and what I meant about putting the cakes on a cookie sheet and using these wonderful fabric rings. What you do is you take these and you soak them in cold water, you get them wet, and you put them around your cake pan. And then, of course, by putting the cake pan also on a cookie sheet, you keep the bottoms and sides from getting too hot and causing a big dome. Now, I made an extra little cake, and you can see how it's domed. And so that's going to mean that when it comes time to frost it and you want a level cake, you're going to have to cut that off. Now, of course, it's not going to go to waste. I mean, you'll eat it. But if you're not good at cutting straight, you might have it uneven. And then, of course, you expose crumbs. And when you want to have a cake that's nicely finished and frosted and hasn't got a lot of crumbs in the frosting, the last thing you want to be tasked with is cutting the dome off the tops of your cakes. And it's not that the cakes didn't rise. I mean, they're perfectly risen and they're nice and thick, and we're going to be able to cut those in half and make 4 layers. But I don't have to cut the dome off of either one of these, and that's going to mean less crumbs and less waste. So I highly recommend buying these wonderful things. You can get them online. They're not very expensive, and they really work. And then always put your cake pans on a cookie sheet so that the bottoms of the pans don't get hot and burn the bottom of the cake before it's had time to cook, or gets too hot too quickly and causes a dome. And by the way, I did use fresh baking powder with these cakes. It was freshly opened today, so that it's not a matter of, old baking powder that didn't work. It's a matter of making sure that the pans don't get so hot that they force a dome. So, tip for the day when it comes to your baking. So now it's time to frost our lovely cake. I've taken our 2 rounds and cut each of them in half, so now I have 4 layers for the cake. And perhaps you're a little more experienced at cutting cakes. I tend to be a little bit crooked, but once it's all frosted, it should be fine. So I'm taking the thickest layer and putting it on the bottom so that it's got enough oomph to hold up the whole cake. And unfortunately, I don't have a pretty cake platter like some folks do. I have a basic cardboard round, and I taped a doily to it, and I'm protecting that with some sheets of waxed paper so that I can keep the doily clean. I put my beautiful frosting in the refrigerator for a while to let it set up a bit. And so now we're going to start frosting and assembling the cake. So we'll take a little bit of our frosting here. Lovely consistency. You'll find that it spreads very nicely. Using an offset spatula, we're going to work it around. And I've made sort of like a homemade turntable by putting my cardboard cake round on an upturned bowl so that I can sort of spin it and move the frosting out to a nice even layer. Take it all the way out to the edge. Make it nice and smooth. And then if I see some places where it could use a little more, I can just add just a little bit. We don't want too much in the layers. Just enough. To keep the cake moist. There we go. Okay, we'll get the next layer. And I like to put crumb side to crumb side. So we'll flip this over, place it on top. And I always like to match the same bottom and top. So this was the bottom that came off of this cake. Okay, now we'll put some more. Another layer. More of our beautiful fluffy frosting. A bit too much this time maybe, I don't know, we'll see. See the beauty of the wax paper. Spin it around. You don't want it too thick in the center. Nice and even out to the sides. Okay, the next layer, again, I put the crumb side down so I'm not always getting crumbs in the lovely frosting. There we go. More on there. Lovely consistency. Spreads nicely, keeps its shape. Final layer, and because I don't have a dome on the top, I again can put the crumbs down. I still have a fairly flat top, and because I am doing a kind of a frosting that's going to be, as I said, lovely swoops and swirls, I don't have to worry about using a bottom for a top and needing that really, really flat surface because I don't want it anyway. It's going to be a very fluffy cake, so I don't need that flat bottom. If I did, I would do this another way around so that the last piece was a bottom so that I had a flat top. But as I mentioned, I'm not very good at doing things like piping and the kinds of decorations where you need that sort of flat top. So I'm happy with putting a slightly rounded top. But again, because it's not domed, I don't have to worry about cutting it off, and there's no crumbs. So that's why I highly recommend using these fabric strips. I don't know what they're called. You'll look them up online. So now I'm just frosting the sides here. Pushing it well in between the layers. Down to the bottom. And because I have the wax paper there, that's okay. It won't get on the plate, or in my case, the cardboard. There we go. Spin it around. Get some more frosting. Bring it around the bottom. Mixing the whipped cream with the cream cheese, because think about if I was trying to frost this cake with straight on whipped cream, it'd be drooping everywhere. I mean, no matter what you try to do, whipped cream just doesn't hold its shape all that well. So, I mean, you get a benefit not only flavor-wise, but certainly texture-wise when you make this half whipped cream, half cream cheese frosting. It gives you the lovely swoops and swirls of whipped cream, but it's much more stabilized and sticks to the cake better. I'm just kind of going around and evening everything up. Some thinner spots, add a little bit more. There we go. All the way down to the bottom. There we go. Spot here, yet more. It's tough getting to the bottom, even with an offset spatula. Now we move it from the bottom to the top now to try and make the sides as level as possible. And this is just the first go at it. We want to get it even at this point. We're not after our swoops and swirls yet. And when we're ready for that, we'll switch from the spatula to a spoon that will help create our swoops and swirls. For now, we're just trying to get all the frosting on and as even as possible. And get our sides as straight as possible. There we go. Okay, time to do the top. A nice big dollop on the top. Let's start moving that around towards the sides.